All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So, it took Pete Carroll 4 years to turn the Seattle Seahawks into a Super Bowl contender, but just one season to be given a pink slip courtesy of the Las Vegas Raiders. After the Raiders' disastrous 3-14 season, which saw them earn the first overall pick in April's NFL draft, Carroll will not be around to select quarterback Fernando Mendoza or anyone else who might have been on his radar. Now, this is not the first time that Pete Carroll was one and done as an NFL head coach. It's more than 30 years ago. He lasted just one season with the New York Jets. And first things first, you ask yourself, where did things go wrong for Pete Carroll with these Raiders? Well, I'll tell you like this. The Raiders were hoping for light, for my opinion, they were hoping for lightning in a bottle with Carroll, who still clearly had the itch to go out there and be a head coach in the NFL following his firing from the Seattle Seahawks back in 2023. Now, we saw Carroll attach his wagon to to Geno Smith at quarterback as he was looking to rekindle some of that magic that they had together in Seattle. But what we got was a Geno Smith who looks very finished, okay, as far as being a starting quarterback in the NFL. We saw Geno lead the league in interceptions this season with 17, in spite of the fact that he missed two games. And as I've said before, there's really a whole lot of nothing going on with the Raiders at this point. Where is the talent? As this franchise needs a complete reboot. And if you really watched the Raiders play this season, it's hard to believe that this team actually won three games. So, sans Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty, and Max Crosby, who do you really have on this team? Okay. Now, Raiders GM John Spytek was spared today as far as getting a pink slip, as he and the team's minority owner, Tom Brady, are going to be putting their thinking caps on, if you will, in order to go out there and attempt to find the next head coach of the Silver and Black. Um, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. The Raiders need an adult in the room who's going to take charge. That's the bottom line. And if you've watched the Raiders, you got to ask yourself, can it get any worse, or it can't get any worse? Maybe it could. We don't know. But conventional wisdom would say that since the Raiders do have the first pick in the draft, they're going to use it on a quarterback, okay? And if the Raiders do decide to go quarterback in round number one, they cannot have a repeat of the Jamarcus Russell disaster from 2007. Okay, the Raiders, if they go out there and take a Fernando Mendoza, they have to put the right people around him. Okay, or any other quarterback that they bring into the building. When I say the right people, you got to put talent, you got to put coaching. You have to put the player in the best possible position to succeed. Now, the Raiders are expected to have nearly $100 million in cap space this offseason, but that doesn't mean that you should go out there and spend it foolishly, okay? Because it's very easy in the NFL for having, to go from having cap flexibility to being handcuffed by it if you really don't know what you're doing. And just a side note, real quick, for those out there who are checking this out, apologies. The chat box, for whatever reason, is not hitting up at this point. I apologize for that. Please do drop some comments, and I promise you, I will answer everything when I am done here. But first and foremost, thank you again for chiming in. So I look at the Raiders, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. They really lack a home field advantage. Okay, we know there's no way to reverse the clock in order to keep them in the Bay Area or LA, but they basically play 17 road games each season because there's no home field advantage for them in Allegiant Stadium because Raiders fans, more often than not, there are outnumbered by the opposing team's fan base. Okay, but can the Raiders find a way to start stringing some wins together and keeping or giving their fans rather something to be proud of. The Raiders, they got to find a way to compete, okay? Because 10 of their losses this season came by at least 10 points, and some of them really weren't even that close. They lost two games 31 to nothing, okay? And prior to yesterday's win to end the season against Kansas City, they had some bad blowouts on their hands this season. Okay, so I'm looking at this Raiders team. Like I said, they've got to find a way to go out there and compete. But you've got the first pick. Okay, you've moved on from Pete Carroll. Okay, who are they going to target, or who should they target to be their next head coach? There have been rumors out there. Okay, possibly of current Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores due to his ties with Tom Brady going back to their days together with the New England Patriots. Now, you've seen and we've seen with the work that Flores has done as the D coordinator of the Vikings. Flores, in my opinion, has really shown that he deserves another chance to be a head coach in the NFL after it did not work out for him with the Miami Dolphins. And honestly, the Dolphins are another bad organization. I think the Dolphins' issues were much bigger than Brian Flores, in my opinion. But you saw how Flores was on the track to changing things for Miami. Okay. And of course, he got let go. But nonetheless, I think a guy like Flores, just for an example, could provide the Raiders with the discipline and the structure that they so desperately need. Also, you've got to find the right offensive coaches and staff to put around a young quarterback, like I said before, in order to give him the opportunity to succeed. The Raiders have to upgrade this roster. Okay, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's one of those where I'm looking at it. I don't see it as a quick fix. It doesn't mean that it's not fixable, but in my opinion, I think the Raiders need to go about this slow. Okay. And I'm saying this because you have to go out there and you have to find the right people. It's important that they hit on multiple picks in this draft. Okay. Because if you go out there and take a quarterback, if you're the Raiders, you've got to put the people around him. Now, I will say this: you go out there and take a quarterback, right off the bat, you're giving him one of the better young tight ends in the National Football League to throw the football to in Brock Bowers. You're giving him a young running back in Ashton Genty that has phenomenal talent. But the Raiders still had one of the worst offenses in the NFL this past season, to the point that no wide receiver for the Raiders even had 700 yards receiving. Jacoby Myers, who was traded midseason to the Jacksonville Jaguars and only played 7 games for the Raiders, was still the third leading receiver on this team this season. That just gives you an idea of how bad things were for this team offensively. Okay, and that overall. So, like I said, they definitely need to upgrade this roster. You have to work on your offensive line. You've got to work on your D line. You need help at linebacker. You need help in the secondary. Other than that, you're okay. Okay. But it's one of those where the Raiders, they got to find a way to close this gap between them and everybody else in the AFC West. I mean, like I said, it might not be a quick fix. Okay. But at the same time, this is why it's so important, and it's going to be important for the Raiders to go out there and find the right head coach. Why? Because you look at where Denver was a couple of years ago and how quickly that Sean Payton got things turned around there. The Broncos have home field advantage throughout the playoffs in the AFC, and there are a lot of people who feel that Denver has what it takes to not only get to the Super Bowl this year but win it. You look at with everything that's gone down with the Chargers under Jim Harbaugh. Now, the Raiders clearly were hopeful that a veteran head coach with championship experience, like a Pete Carroll, was going to be able to do the same for them. But you got to wonder, maybe the game in the NFL has passed Pete Carroll by. Okay, and it really did not play out well for him this season. You know, Pete was never really a guy to fire assistant coaches midseason. He got off of Chip Kelly. A lot of questions, you know, from people outside of the organization as far as the role of Pete Carroll's kids with this coaching staff. And at the end of the day, at times, Pete Carroll just simply looked out the lunch. But getting back to what the Raiders need to do going forward. I don't feel that this is going to be a make or break off season for them per se, but at some point you've got to ask yourself, when is enough going to be enough? And the Raiders, like I said, need to get themselves some adults in the room who are going to say, you know what, not on our watch. This ain't the way that it's going down. So again, making the right choice with that first overall pick is going to be paramount for the silver and black. But to me, I feel like it's going to be even more important for them to get it right at head coach. Okay, because you can have talent, but if you don't have that leader, if you don't have that guiding light, it ain't gonna amount to a hill of beans. So the Raiders have to find a way to get this right. It's really hard to believe, okay, because there was a time when the Raiders were the gold standard of success in the National Football League. At one point, a little bit more than 30 years ago, we're talking about the Raiders having the highest win percentage all time of any team in the NFL. And like I said, I mean, look at what they've been reduced to. And like I said, they need leadership. You go back to the coaching situation for the Raiders right now. This gives you an idea of how bad the things are. Outside of John Gruden, in either one of his two stints as the Raiders head coach, you've got to go all the way back to when this team still played in Los Angeles, when Art Shell was in his first stint as a head coach of the Raiders, to find the last time that any head coach of the Raiders, not named John Gruden, made it to year four. When you have that much turnover at one of the most important positions in your franchise, you're not going to win. So when you hear that, it really shouldn't be a surprise to say, hey, the Raiders have only made the playoffs twice following their loss in Super Bowl 36 to the Bucks. Okay, and that was how many years ago? During that time, you have to go all the way back to the 2002 AFC Championship game, January 2003, when the Raiders beat the Titans. That was the last time that the Raiders won a playoff game. And again, you cannot have a situation where, and I say this for any team in the NFL, GM, head coach, quarterback, you cannot miss on those three decisions. And if you screw it up, it's really going to set your franchise back. And of course, the Raiders have consistently screwed that up. Enough is enough, and they have to find a way to figure this out. So for me, I look at the Raiders. They're an empty canvas right now, but you still need to find the right artist who's going to come in there and paint the proper portrait that's going to give you an opportunity to compete. The Raiders need to find a way, like I said before, to close the gap between them and everybody else in the AFC West. But for once, and I don't know when, the Raiders need to have themselves a plan. I'm not sure what their plan is right now. Okay. And I'm not going to act like I do know, but they have to have a plan, and they have to formulate a plan that is going to lead to success. You look at the Broncos under Sean Payton, and you look at the Chargers under Jim Harbaugh. And I'm using them as an example because they're in the same division as the Raiders. Both of these teams, what one of the first things that they did, they strengthened up their defense because they said, hey, you know what? You're not going to sit up there and try to outscore the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes when they were contending for the Super Bowl championship. But what you can do, you can hurry him up. You can speed him up with what you can do defensively. And you look at that Broncos defense right now, that front seven, vicious. Okay. You look at the Chargers and how they've been able to do things defensively as well. Okay. So I think that right there starts with an attitude from the head coach. You look at both of those guys, they established their run games. Okay. When they got to town, being able to run the football, being able to put pressure on opposing quarterbacks, that comes from an attitude, and it starts with your head coach. So again, like I said, the Raiders need somebody in that organization who is going to say, you know what, not on my watch. It ain't going down no more. And they hate to lose more than they enjoy winning. That to me, I think is the biggest key. So, like I said, the first overall pick is fine. The Raiders cannot afford to miss on that, but they also cannot afford to miss on who they want to come in there and be their next head coach. So I look at it like this. You need to hit a home run with this head coaching hire because not only do you need to show your fan base that you're for real, you need to show the guys in that locker room that, hey, we've got somebody in here, or we're bringing somebody in here rather, that's going to turn this thing around. You need to go out there and draft a couple of players, not just one or two, but you need to draft some guys that are going to make people say, hey, you know what? Things are changing for the Raiders. And then you need to go out there and find one or two guys in free agency that's going to make people sit up and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to start paying attention to the Raiders. Super important, okay, for the Raiders to try to figure this thing out this offseason because guess what? If they don't, the futility that we've seen with this organization for now almost 25 years is going to continue. What happened to the old days with the commitment of excellence, or commitment to excellence, rather, should I say? Okay. This Raiders team, they have fallen on the wayside. Now, I will say this: the National Football League, I feel, is a better place when the Raiders are relevant. Okay, and the Raiders have not been relevant for quite some time. I'm old enough to remember first time around when they were in LA and they were feared. My dad, RIP to him, used to tell me about the original Oakland Raiders. Your Jack Tatums, your Ted Hendrickses, okay? And then, of course, going back to Oakland, they had some success under Gruden initially before he left and went to Tampa. But the Raiders need to get back to that. Okay, they truly do. I'm not surprised about Pete Carroll being one and done. Typically you don't want to see a head coach gone after one season, but at the same time, Pete Carroll really didn't do anything, or he really didn't ingratiate himself to anybody to say, you know what, keep this guy around for 2026. That was a change that had to be made for the Raiders. There's more changes that need to come. Okay, what are Tom Brady and the Brain Trust going to do? Because I really don't count Mark Davis on this aspect because Mark Davis has not really shown you anything or done anything to make you be like, you know what, Mark Davis knows what he's doing. But nonetheless, will this brain trust, if you will, get things turned around for the silver and black? We got to wait and see. But folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Again, apologies. The chat box, for whatever reason, is not working tonight. I do apologize about that. But like I said, please do drop some messages and comments on this podcast. I guarantee you, I will check them. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And like I always say, I appreciate the support. As always, if you like what you heard and saw on this podcast, you know what to do. Just hit that like button as well as subscribing to the channel. And like I always say, it's greatly appreciated. Also, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, you can check me out anytime at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you give me that follow, it will be my pleasure to do the same in return. And that also goes for Instagram, and you can check me out at 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge. Also, if you are on Facebook, definitely check out the Sports Depot 365. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the better sports groups going on social media. And also, be sure to continue to check out this channel this week as I got plenty to talk about coming for the upcoming quarterfinals in the college football playoff. Pardon me, the semifinals, rather, excuse me, of the college football playoff, as well as the wild card round in the National Football League. But until next time, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.